The snow came sideways across the moor that afternoon. It had been falling since before light. By 3 o'clock, the road out of Harnby had gone under, and the dry stone walls that marked the road had gone under, and there was nothing left of the world but white ground and white air, and the black crowns of the stones where the wind had scoured them bare. Damaris Lark walked with her chin down, and her basket held hard against her chest. She had gone into the village for tallow and for the small brown bottle that helped her grandmother sleep, and she had known the weather would turn, and had gone anyway, because the bottle had been empty for 2 nights. Her hands were wrapped in wool to the second knuckle. She kept them that way from the first frost to the last. A lace-maker keeps her hands the way a fiddler keeps his ear. All the work lives in the ends of the fingers, in the thin skin there that can tell one thread from another in the dark. And Damaris had been told, since she was 6 years old, that her hands were not hers to spend. They belonged to the rent. They belonged to the old woman in the chair by the fire who had taught her every stitch she knew and could no longer see to make one. She counted her steps. She had done it since she was a girl, a habit from walking this road in the dark, and the only way she knew to keep the moor from swallowing her sense of distance. 200 to the milestone, 400 more to the beck, 900 and something to the fallow gate, and then the long, slow drop into the valley where the light of the cottage would show if the shutter was open. She was at 640 when she heard it. She stopped. The wind on that stretch of moor came at her from 3 sides at once and made a noise like a door dragged over stone. She listened through it. She waited for the gust to fall away. It came again. It was not the wind. It was a horse, and a horse does not make that sound unless something has gone very wrong. Damaris set the basket down in the snow. She did not think about the basket. She went toward the sound at a run, which on that ground meant a kind of falling forward, one leg driving through the crust, and the other swinging out to catch her. The fallow gate stood where the road bent between 2 humps of ground. It was not a gate any longer. It was 2 stone posts and a fallen lintel, and people still called it by its name, because the moor keeps its names long after it loses the things. The coach was on its side across the road. She saw the wheel first, turning slowly in the wind, and then the black bulk of the body of it, and then the horses. One of the pair was down in the traces and badly caught. The other was on its feet and shaking. Damaris got the standing one loose and turned it out onto the moor, and knelt by the other and did what little could be done, and then made herself get up, because there was a sound coming from somewhere else. The driver lay in the snow a little apart from the wreck. She knelt and put her wrapped hand against his throat and counted to 60, slowly, and there was nothing under her fingers but cold. She closed his eyes and said a few words her grandmother would have said. Then she stood up, because there was nothing else she could do for him. A knocking, low down and slow, and coming from inside the coach. She climbed onto the underside of the vehicle. The door was above her now, its window starred and half gone. She got her fingers into the frame and pulled, and it didn't move. She braced her boot against the rail and pulled again, and it gave a 1/4 of an inch and stopped. The latch was iced. Damaris looked at her wrapped hands. She looked at the door. Then she pulled the wool off her right hand with her teeth and pushed the mitten into her pocket and set her bare fingers against the iron. The cold went into her like a nail. She worked the latch with the ends of her fingers, because the ends of her fingers were the only part of her that could feel where the mechanism sat. It did not give. She breathed on it and worked it again. Her nail split. She did not notice for a while, and when she did notice, she kept going. The latch turned. The door came up. There was a man inside, folded into the angle where the seat met the floor, and there was a strongbox on him, and there was blood on his face. His hat was gone. His scarf had come loose across his mouth. He was trying to lift the box off his own chest and had no strength in his arm at all, and the knocking she had heard was his boot heel against the panel. Damaris got down inside with him. She took the box in both hands and set her back against the seat and lifted, and it came, and she shoved it into the well of the coach. The man drew a breath that sounded like cloth tearing. "Can you stand?" she said. He said something. It was not words. "I'm going to get you out. You will have to help me. Do you hear me?" His eyes opened. In that light, she could not have said what color they were. They found her face and stayed on it. "Yes," he said. She got her shoulder under his arm and pushed while he pulled, and between them, they came up out of the coach and down into the snow. He went to his knees. She let him kneel a moment and got him up again. She had 2 miles. She took her shawl off and put it over his head and knotted it under his arm, and she pulled his good hand across her, and she started walking, and she began to count. 60. He was heavier than any weight she had ever carried, and his boots dragged, and every third step he lost the road and went into the drift, and she hauled him out of it. 200. The snow had stopped coming down and started coming across, which was worse. 400. He stopped. He said something about leaving him, and she told him to save his breath for his legs. 600. Her right hand had stopped hurting. She had been born on this moor, and she knew exactly what that meant, and she took a fresh grip on his wrist with that hand anyway, because it was the hand on his side, and there was nothing to be done about it. 900. He was talking now, low, not to her. A name, twice. She did not catch it. 1140. The ground went out from under them both, and she understood that this was the drop into the valley, and that she had not miscounted. And she began to laugh, and the laugh came out of her as one hard sound and nothing more. 1200. There was a light below and to the left. The shutter was open. She did not count the rest. Her grandmother had the door open before they reached it. Blind for 9 years, and she still knew the sound of her own gait. "Damaris." "Not me," Damaris said. "Him. The fire. Now." They put him on the flags in front of the hearth, because the bed was up the ladder, and neither of them could have got him up it. Aveline Lark moved through her own kitchen the way she had moved through it since the sight went, which was without hesitation and without touching anything twice. She had the kettle on. She had the blankets down off the press. She talked the whole time, quietly, mostly to herself, and it steadied them both. Damaris cut the coat away. It did not cut easily. The cloth was heavy and close woven, and there was a lining inside it of something that turned the blade, and she had to work at it with the shears, and when it came off him, it weighed as much as a wet fleece. She washed the blood from his face. It came from a cut above the eyebrow, and it had run down and dried, and there was a great deal of it, and none of it mattered, which she knew from the way it had run. She sponged it off in 3 passes: forehead, cheek, jaw. On the 3rd pass, she stopped. She sat back on her heels with the cloth in her hand and the water going pink in the bowl, and she looked at him for a long moment without moving at all. "What is it?" said her grandmother. Damaris did not answer. "Girl, what is it?" "Nothing. Bring the wool." Aveline came with the wool. She knelt down, slowly, with one hand on the settle, and she found the man by touch, and she began to chafe warmth into his right hand between both of hers. She was very good at it. She had done it for fishermen and for shepherds, and once for a boy who had gone through the ice on the Hornby Dam, and she had a rhythm to it that was almost like kneading. She stopped. "There is a ring on this hand," she said. "Yes." Turn it to the fire and tell me what is cut into it. Damaris leaned over. The firelight ran along the gold and found the shape and filled it. A hair, she said, sitting up, under a moon. Her grandmother's hands went still on the man's hand. The fire spat. Outside, the wind came round the end of the cottage and found the gap under the door and pushed a little tongue of snow across the flags toward them, and neither woman moved to stop it. Under a crescent moon, Aveline said. Not a full one. A crescent. The old woman sat back. She was quiet for what seemed a long time. Then she said the name, and she said it flatly, the way a person says a thing they have known for 30 seconds, and have spent those 30 seconds hoping to be wrong about. Ellencourt. Damaris put the cloth down in the water. I know, she said. I saw his face. She had seen his face once before, and once had been enough. It was September, when the door stood open all day, and the light reached the frame where the lace was pinned. She remembered exactly where she had been in the pattern, and she never finished that piece. 3 men had come up the path. She had heard the horses at the gate, and thought it was the carrier. The first was the steward, who had always been fair with her grandmother about the coal. The second was a lawyer from Thirsk. The third came in last, and filled the doorway, and took his hat off and did not sit, because there was nowhere in that room for a man like that to sit. He had been perfectly courteous. That was the part she could never explain afterward. He had not been cruel, and had not once raised his voice. He had stood in her grandmother's kitchen with his hat in his hand, and set out his position. He had a ward, his wife's sister's child, a girl of 8 then, orphaned and in his care. He was a widower, and there were people who held that a man alone could not raise a girl, and who meant to make an argument of it. The child needed a woman in the house. He needed a wife, and would not insult anyone by pretending to a warmth he did not feel. He had been told Miss Lark was sensible and clever with her hands, and managed a household on very little. The terms were in the lawyer's case, and they were, he said, generous. They were. The lease on the cottage, raised twice in 4 years, would be discharged, not renewed. Discharged in perpetuity, in her grandmother's name. Her grandmother had sat by the cold hearth, with her blind eyes turned toward the voices, and had said nothing. And Damaris had stood up from her lace frame and had said no. Not gently. She had not stammered, and had not wept, and had not asked for a day to consider it. She had stood in front of a steward and a lawyer and a marquess, and said that she was obliged to his lordship for his frankness, and would answer him with the same. You have described a difficulty, she had said, and you have described a remedy, and the remedy is a woman. Any woman would do. You have come to me because I am sensible, and I am cheap. My lord, I will not be the cure for another person's problem. I am not medicine. Good day. The lawyer had made a sound. The steward had looked at the floor. The marquis had not moved. Then he had put his hat on his head in a house, which no gentleman did, and turned and gone out, and the horses went down the lane, and that was the whole of it. There is nothing a village likes better than a great man made small in a small room. Some in Harnby told it to strangers for money at the wool fair. Others crossed the street rather than speak to her at all. The lease came up at Martinmas. It had gone up again. Damaris looked down at the man on her floor. His breathing had changed while she was remembering. It had gone shallow and quick, and there was a sound in it she did not like. He is not well, her grandmother said. Do you hear it? Yes. He wants a doctor, and there is no road to fetch one on. I know. The old woman turned her face toward her. Damaris, when he wakes, he is going to open his eyes in this house. Yours. Mine. Have you thought what he will make of that? She thought about it now, kneeling on the flags with the bowl of pink water going cold beside her, and the fire throwing the shape of a sitting Heir across the ceiling each time it caught the ring. "No," she said. She lifted her right hand into the light and looked at it properly for the first time since the gate. The two smallest fingers had gone the color of tallow. She pressed the ball of the thumb against each fingertip in turn, the way she had done 10,000 times to pick up a thread. She could not feel the fourth. She could not feel the fifth. She sat very still and said nothing, and after a while she wrapped the hand in the wool again and put it in her lap and left it there. He woke twice before he woke properly. The first time it was dark, and a woman's voice above him was counting, and he thought he was still on the road, and the counting was the wheels, and he went under again. The second time there was a smell of peat smoke and wet wool and tallow, and a hand was turning his head sideways on a folded blanket. He did not fight it. He had no means of fighting anything. The third time he opened his eyes and knew where he was and wished he did not. The ceiling was low and blackened and crossed by a single beam. He turned his head. There was a fire in a stone hearth burning low and well, and a settle and a press, and against the window a wooden frame set at an angle with a half-made piece of lace pinned across it, and 100 bobbins hanging off the bottom of it, and every one of them still. He lay and looked at that for a long time. Somebody had taken his coat and his boots. He was in a shirt that was not his own. It was clean and coarse, and mended at the shoulder by somebody who could mend, and it was too short in the arm. And he understood that it had belonged to a man who was not alive to want it back. An old woman came in from the scullery carrying a bowl. "You are awake," she said, without turning her face toward him. "I heard your breathing change an hour since. I did not speak because you were entitled to wake in your own time." "Where?" "Harnby, the low road. You are on my kitchen floor because we could not get you up the ladder." "How long?" 2 days and a piece." He tried to sit up. Something happened along the whole right side of his chest that made him stop and hold quite still and breathe in a shallow, careful way until it went off. "Yes," said the old woman. "Ribs. 2 of them, I should think. And your shoulder is not right either. Lie down." He lay down. The door opened. Snowlight came in with a figure in it, and then the door shut and the light went, and the figure crossed the room and set a basket of peat beside the hearth and began to build up the fire, and did not look at him at all. He watched her do it. Then she straightened and turned, and he saw her face in daylight for the first time since September. "Miss Lark," he said. "My lord." Neither of them said anything else for some while. The fire took the new peat and settled into it. Somewhere out in the yard, a bird was going along the wall and stopping and going along it again. "It was you on the road," he said. "Yes. You carried me. You walked. I steered. I wasn't walking, Miss Lark. You were walking. You were doing it badly." He shut his eyes. When he opened them, she had gone back to the fire and was setting the iron straight, and he said to her back. There was a driver. Her hands stopped. He knew from the way they stopped. He had spent his life in rooms where the answer arrived before anybody spoke it. "Isham," he said. His name was Isham. He had been with the house 19 years. "I found him first," she said, "before I heard you. He was out of the coach, and he was in the snow, and I knelt down, and I put my hand on his neck, and I counted, and there was nothing there, and I closed his eyes, and I said what my grandmother would have said. I want you to know that somebody did that. I have been waiting 2 days to be able to tell you." He did not answer. She let him not answer. After a while, he put the back of his wrist across his eyes and left it there, and Aveline Lark, who could not see it, went out into the scullery and made a great deal of unnecessary noise with the pans, and Damaris stood at the fire with her back turned and gave the man on her floor the only privacy her kitchen had to offer. He came back to himself within a minute or two. "There was a box," he said. "There was. Where is it?" "In the coach. In the well of it. Under the snow, with everything else." He moved then, and it cost him, and she was across the room and had a hand flat on his good shoulder before he had got 6 inches off the flags. "No. Miss Lark, you have 2 ribs and a shoulder, and a road shut since Tuesday. If you go up onto that moor, you will be a second man I bring down off it, and I cannot do it twice. Lie down." He lay down. "What is in the box?" she said. He looked at the beam. He was a long time answering, and when he did answer, he spoke as if he were reading out an inventory. "Papers concerning my ward. She is 9 years old. Her mother was my wife's sister, and both her parents are dead, and she has lived in my house for 4 years. Her grandmother has begun an action to have her removed from my care and placed in her own. I was going to York to answer it. The papers I need to answer it with are in that box. Then the box will keep. Snow does not read." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would have gone if he had been a different man in a different week. The road stayed shut for 3 more days. They were the strangest days of her life. A marquess lay on her kitchen floor in her father's shirt, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. He could not be moved. He could not be housed anywhere better, because there was nowhere better inside 4 miles. He was not an easy guest. He was not a difficult one either. He was a man used to being the largest fact in any room, laid flat in a room not built to hold him, and he handled it by going very quiet and asking permission for things no man in his position had asked permission for in his adult life. Permission to have the shutter opened. Permission for a light after dark, which cost tallow, which he knew. Permission to have the old woman read to him, which she did from the only 2 books in the house, and one of them was about sheep. On the 2nd afternoon, Aveline knelt down and set about his hand again, the way she had the first night, and he let her. He lay still and let a blind woman of 70 chafe his hand in a kitchen, and he said thank you at the end of it. And Damaris, watching from the lace frame, revised something she had been certain about since September. She worked while he was there. She had to. There was a length promised into Thirsk, and it did not care about the weather. He watched her at it on the 3rd day, and said, "You are doing that with your left hand." The bobbins did not stop. "I am." "You are right-handed. You wrote your name on my lawyer's paper with your right hand. I remember it." "I am teaching myself the other way. It is a good winter for it." "Why?" "Because a woman who can work only one way is a woman with one way to eat." It was not a lie. She had arranged it very carefully so that it would not be a lie, and she watched him turn it over and find nothing wrong with it, and she went back to the pattern, and her 2 dead fingers lay curled against her palm inside the wool where he could not see them. On the 5th morning, the wind dropped, and the men from the hall got away through with shovels, and by noon there was a carriage in the lane with a groom and a doctor in it, and the kitchen was full of people who all wanted to do things at once. They got him up and into a coat that fitted him. He stopped in the doorway with a hand on the frame and turned around. "Miss Lark." She was by the hearth. She had her hands behind her back, which he did not remark on. "I have not yet said what I owe you, because I have been lying on your floor for 5 days, and a man says that's standing up. What is owed here cannot be settled, but a part of it can. The lease on this house comes to me. I intend to end it. Not raise it. End it. It goes to your grandmother, and after her to you. and there is no rent on it ever again, and I will have the papers drawn this week." The room was very quiet. Behind him, the groom was doing something with a strap, and the sound of it came in loud. "No," said Damaris Lark. He did not move. "I beg your pardon. You will not pay me for a man's life, not his, and not yours." Her voice was low, and it did not shake, and afterward she could not remember deciding to say any of it. "In September, you came into this room, and you put a price on me. You did it politely. You did it out loud, in front of a lawyer, and you have never once had it explained to you what that was like, so I will explain it now. It was not the offer. It was the arithmetic. It was hearing what I was worth read off a page by a stranger while I stood at my own frame. 5 days ago I went up the moor for tallow, and I came back with a man. I did not know it was you. I would have gone into that coach for the carrier, or for a tinker, or for a dog. If you send me a paper about a lease, you will have made it arithmetic again, and I would rather owe rent for the rest of my life than have this be a sum that came out even. So no, my lord. You may thank me, and I will take that. You may not pay me." Nobody in that yard or that doorway said anything at all. Then the Marquess of Elincourt inclined his head to a lace-maker in a mended shirt, more deeply than his rank had any business allowing, and said, "Thank you," and went out to the carriage. The summons came 9 days later, and it was not from him. It was a printed form, with the blanks filled in by a clerk. It required Damaris Lark of Harnby to attend and give evidence at the inquest touching the death of Josiah Isham, and it named the day and the hour, and at the bottom it named the place. Elincourt Hall. "They hold them at inns," her grandmother said. "Not this one. The inn has no room that will take 40. It says the Long Gallery. They will look at you. They will look at me either way. I would rather be looked at sitting down." The carriage that came was not his, it was the coroner's, and the other two in it did not speak to her once in 8 miles. She had passed the gates of Elincourt twice in her life, both times on foot and on the far side of the road. Going up the drive was different. The oaks went by, then the trees stopped, and the front of the house came out at her all at once, pale stone and a great many windows, and she made herself count them, because counting was what she had instead of courage, and she got to 30 and gave it up. Inside, the floor was black and white stone, and her boots were loud on it. There was a smell of beeswax and cold, and pictures of people who had never carried anything. A servant put her on a bench outside a door and told her she would be called, and she sat in a house the size of a village and waited to be asked how a man had died. "Are you the lace one?" A girl had come round the corner of the passage. She was 9 or thereabouts, in a dark dress with a black band on the sleeve, and she had stopped 4 feet away with her hands behind her back and her chin up, in the manner of a person who has been told not to speak to strangers and has decided the instruction does not apply today. "I make lace," said Damaris. "Yes." "You are the one who pulled him out of the coach." "Yes." "I am Clemens." She came 2 steps nearer. "They will not let me go in. I asked twice. They say it is not fit. Isham used to let me hold the whip when we went at a walk, and nobody has told me anything except that he is dead, and everybody stops talking when I come into a room, and that is worse than being told." Damaris looked at her for a moment. Then she moved along the bench. Clement sat down on it, not close, and swung her feet, and looked at the opposite wall. He did not know, Damaris said. That is the first thing. It was quick, and it was dark, and it was snowing, and he knew nothing about it. The second thing is that he was thrown clear before the coach went over, so he was not underneath it, and people will not tell you that, because they think you cannot hear it, and you can. The third thing is that I found him before I found your guardian. And I stayed with him, and he wasn't left in the snow on his own. Somebody came. I want you to have that." The feet stopped swinging. Nobody had said any of that. No. Papa Ansel would have. He does not lie to me. But he has not been able to speak of Isham at all, and I did not like to make him. "Then you have both been being kind at each other," said Damaris, "and it has cost you a fortnight. Families do it." The girl thought about this with great seriousness. "You are not what my grandmother says you are," she said. Damaris had no time to ask what that meant, because the door opened and her name was read out. The long gallery held 60 and not 40. Benches down both sides, the coroner at a table under the window, a jury of local men in the good clothes they owned for church and funerals, and at the far end, standing with one hand on the back of a chair, the Marquess of Elincourt. She gave her evidence plainly and in order, the way she did everything. The tallow, the hour, the wind, the sound, the horse, Isham, and the 60 she had counted with her fingers on his neck, the knocking inside the coach, the latch. The coroner wrote. The jury listened. Then a man rose from the second bench, who had a way of putting his thumbs into his waistcoat, and who introduced himself as acting for an interested party, and asked whether he might put 1 or 2 questions to the witness. He put 4 questions. The first 3 were about times and distances, and she answered them. The 4th was this: "Miss Lark, you have told this court you lifted a strong box off his lordship's chest. Can you tell us where that box is now?" The room changed. She felt it change. "In the coach, so far as I know, where I left it." "You left a strong box belonging to the Elincourt estate open on a public road, in the dark, having been alone with it." "I left a box. I took a man." "And you would have this court believe that a young woman in your circumstances, alone in the snow, with an unconscious gentleman and an unattended strong-box, made no examination of it whatsoever." Damaris looked at him. "Sir," she said, "you have asked me what I did with a box. I will tell you what I did with my hands that night, and you may draw your own conclusions. I took the wool off them and put them on iron at a temperature you have never in your life touched, and I got a door open with them, and I have paid for it. Ask me anything you like about the box. I never opened it. I never thought about it. There was a man underneath it." Nobody spoke. Then the coroner said, without looking up from his writing, that the question did not arise on the matter before the court, and that the witness might stand down, and thanked her for her clearness, and that was the end of it. She went out by the side door because her legs had begun to go, and she did not intend to do it in the gallery. She got as far as the passage and put her back against the paneling and stood with her eyes shut. When she opened them, the Marquess of Elincourt was standing about 10 feet away with his hat under his arm, and he had evidently been there for a little while, and he did not come any closer. "I did not know he would do that," he said. "He does not act for me." "I know who he acts for." "Yes," he said. "So do I." He turned his hat around once. "Miss Lark, when they have done in there, will you sit with me for a quarter of an hour? Not about the box. Not about the lease. I have something I would like to say to you, and I have been carrying it since September, and I would take it very kindly." The room he took her to was small, which surprised her, because nothing else in that house was. It had 1 window and a fire, and 2 chairs, and a great many books lying about in the way of a room somebody used. He poured the tea himself, and made no ceremony of it, and she took the cup with her left hand and held it in her lap. He did not sit at once. He went to a side table and came back and put something down beside her chair. It was her basket. The willow was black and swollen, and the handle had gone at one side. The paper of pins had rusted through and stained the bottom, and there was a tallow candle in it, with a bite out of it where something had been at it in the thaw. "It was 30 yards short of the gate," he said, "on the Harnby side. I went up on the Tuesday when the road cleared. I do not know why I wanted it. I have never made a sensible answer to that, and I have stopped trying." Damaris put her hand on the ruined thing and did not say anything for a while, and he waited and did not fill it. "Thank you," she said. He sat down. "In September," he said, "I came to your grandmother's house, and I made you an offer of marriage in front of 2 other men, and I have spent 5 months trying to understand why I could not afterward stop thinking about it. And about 10 days ago, lying on your floor, I understood. My lord, let me get it out. I have arranged it in an order, and if you stop me, I shall lose it." He put his hands on his knees and looked at the fire. "I rehearsed it. That is the thing. I sat in a room with Pike, and we went through it as we would have gone through a lease. He advised me on the sum. He advised me to have the terms read aloud, because a woman in your position would want to hear the figures in a stranger's voice and not feel she had bargained. I thought that was consideration. I costed you, and I called it consideration. And then I carried it up your path and let a lawyer read it out. And you stood up at your frame and told me in 1 sentence exactly what I had done. And I put my hat on in your grandmother's house and walked out because I could not answer you. I was not angry. I want that understood. I have been many things since September, and angry was about 4 hours of it. What I have mostly been is a man who found out at 36 that he had learned to think about people the way he thinks about land." The fire moved. She looked at it. "You did not have to tell me that," she said. "No. Most men would have let it lie. It has been 5 months. I had stopped expecting anything, and I had made my peace with it. And you could have left me in that peace, and nobody in the world would have thought worse of you. I should have thought worse of me. Why have you told me?" "Because you are sitting in my house," he said, "and you have just been called a thief in my gallery by a man my mother-in-law is paying. And you did not once look at me while it was happening. And you are to understand that I do not require you to be grateful to me for anything, and that I never should have arranged matters so that you would have to be." Damaris set the cup down on the table. She was a long time deciding, and she knew she was deciding, and he let her. "May I tell you the true reason," she said, "if you will. My father died when I was 6. My mother made lace, and she sold it into Thirsk to a man named Bellwood, who had a warehouse and 2 carts, and a wife who had died. He was not a cruel man. I want to say that at the start, because everybody who tells this kind of story tells it as though the man were cruel, and he was not. He was ordinary. He paid the doctor for my grandmother's eyes. He paid for my schooling, such as it was. He married my mother in the spring of the year I turned 8, and she was in his house for 11 years, and I was in it with her. And in 11 years, I never once heard my mother disagree with him. Not about the fire, not about the dinner, not about me. Not because he would have struck her. He would not have. Because she owed him, and the owing never went down. Every day it was there on the table with the bread. He had paid for her mother's eyes, and there is no sum a woman like my mother can ever pay back against a thing like that. So she paid it in the only coin she had, which was agreeing. 11 years of agreeing. I will give you one instance, and then I have done. When I was 14, he decided I should not go on with the lace. He had a notion I might be put to the counting house, and he said so at supper, and my mother looked at her plate and said it was a kind thought. She had taught me every stitch I know sitting on a stool with her knees against mine. She had put my first bobbin in my hand, and she looked at her plate and said it was a kind thought, and I went into the counting house for 2 years, and I hated every hour of it, and it was not his doing. It was hers. That is what the owing does. It makes a woman argue against her own child on a man's behalf before he has even asked her to. She died agreeing. She was 41. She stopped and picked the cup up again and put it down without drinking. When your lawyer read out the lease and the sum and the provision for my grandmother's care, I did not hear an offer of marriage, my lord. I heard the bread on the table. I heard the rest of my life spent being grateful to a man who had been kind to me. That is what I refused. I have never been able to say it to anybody, because it sounds like ingratitude, and because saying it out loud means saying that my mother was unhappy, and I loved her, and she never said so once. The room was quiet. Out in the passage, somebody went past with something on a tray, and the sound went away down the house. "Thank you," he said at last, "for telling me that. You asked." "I have asked a good many people a good many things," he said. "I have not often been answered. It is one of the inconveniences of the title. People find out what you would like to hear, and then they say it. And after 20 years of it, a man begins to think he is unusually easy to agree with. People ask a great many things they are not owed an answer to." He turned his head and looked at her properly. "It also explains the lease, and I have been an idiot about the lease, and I shall not raise it again. No. I have one thing more, and then I shall put you in a carriage." He stood up. He went to the window and stood with his back to her, which she understood he was doing on purpose. "I am not going to make you an offer of marriage. Not now, and not later. I gave you an answer once in front of witnesses, and you gave me one, and I hold that to be finished, and I will not reopen it, and you have my word on that, which I have never yet broken to anybody. But I find that I don't want to stop knowing you, and I am aware that there is no honest way for a man in my position to say that to a woman in yours, without it becoming exactly the thing you refused. So I have thought of the smallest thing I could ask for. Let me send you a question. 1. Every week, not a letter, a question on a half sheet, with nothing else on it. You may answer it or not. If you do not answer, I shall send the next one anyway, unless you tell me to stop. And if you tell me to stop, I will stop that day, and you will never hear from me again. And nothing whatever will happen to your lease, or your grandmother, or your trade. I want that said plainly, so that there is nothing under it." He turned round. "May I send you a question, Miss Lark?" Damaris sat in a small, warm room with a ruined basket at her feet, and her 2 dead fingers curled inside the wool where nobody could see them, and found that she had already decided, some minutes ago, without noticing. "You may send me a question," she said. The first question came on a Tuesday, and it said, in a hand that was smaller than she had expected, "What is the earliest thing you can remember?" She looked at it for 2 days. Then she wrote, "My mother's knees against mine, and a stool, and being told to keep my elbows down." The second came the following Tuesday. "What is the worst thing about my house?" That one she answered the same evening. "Every room is arranged so that a person coming into it will know at once that they are not the most important thing in it. The pictures are hung too high. A woman of my height cannot see the faces." The third asked whether a man of 6 and 30 could be taught anything, and she wrote back that he could be taught a great deal, but that he would have to be taught it by somebody who was not paid by him, and that this was the whole of his difficulty in life. They came every Tuesday. They were always on a half sheet, and there was never anything else on the paper. No greeting, no name at the end, nothing that could be shown to anybody and made into a story, which she understood after a month was the entire point, and which she found she resented and was grateful for at the same time. She kept them in the tea caddy that had no tea in it. Harnby noticed, because Harnby noticed everything. The carrier who brought them was not a discreet man. There was a fortnight in March when women who had known her since she was born found reasons not to want lace, and a man outside the church said something to his friend at exactly the volume required, and Damaris walked past him and did not turn her head, and went home and was sick. And in April, the Thirsk order came back. Marchbank sent it with a note. The note was kind. That was somehow the unbearable part. He wrote that the last 3 lengths had not been up to her usual, that the ground was uneven in places, and there were 2 dropped picots he could not sell past, and that he would be glad to take work from her again when she was well. Damaris read it standing at her frame. Then she put it in the fire and stood and watched it go. She had been working 10 hours a day left-handed since January. She had known. Some part of her had known since the 2nd week, when she had put a piece up to the window and seen it in proper light, and she had gone on because there was nothing else to go on to. "What was it?" said her grandmother from the settle. "Nothing. The carrier." The old woman said nothing, and went on saying nothing, and the not saying went on so long that it became its own kind of answer, and neither of them touched it. That Tuesday the question said, "What would you do with a day on which nothing whatever was required of you?" Damaris sat down with the pen and could not write a word. She sat there until the candle was half gone. Then she turned the half-sheet over and wrote on the back of it, for the first time in 11 weeks, a question of her own. "Why do you not ask me anything that matters?" She sent it before she could think better of it, and then spent 6 days in a condition she could not have described to anybody. And on the 7th, the answer came, and it was not on a half-sheet. It was on a whole one, and it said only this: "Because you told me in September what happens to a woman who has asked for more than she has agreed to give, and I would sooner ask you nothing ever again than be another man who did that to you. But I will ask you whatever you like if you tell me you would like it." She read it 4 times. Then she folded it very small and put it in the caddy with the others, and went out and stood in the yard in the dark for a while, and did not go in until she was cold, and could not have said afterward what she had been thinking about, only that it had gone on some time, and that she had not once, in the whole of it, thought about the lace. The carriage came up the lane on the 2nd Thursday in May. It was a town carriage, and it had no business on that road, and it had suffered for it, and the woman who got out of it looked at the cottage for a moment, the way a person looks at a figure they are confirming against a ledger. She was tall and very upright, and about 60, in gray, with a face that had been handsome and had decided some years ago that it was finished with the business. She came up the path without waiting to be met and stopped in the doorway. "You are Miss Lark?" "I am." "I am Honoria Vacher. My daughter was Marchioness of Ellencourt. I am the Dowager Countess of Marbury, and I have come 9 miles on a road that has damaged my carriage, and I should like to sit down." Damaris stood back from the door. Lady Honoria came in and looked around the room once, comprehensively, and sat down in the good chair by the hearth, which was Aveline's chair, and which she could not have known was Aveline's chair, and Damaris let it go. "Your grandmother is in the scullery. Send her out." "She is blind, my lady, and it is her house, and she will hear us wherever she is. She may as well hear us in the warm." Something went across the gray face, and did not stay. "Very well." Lady Honoria set her gloves on her knee. "I shall be direct, because I have not the time to be anything else, and because you have the look of a person who prefers it. In February, my solicitors began an action to remove my granddaughter from the guardianship of the Marquis of Ellencourt. The action is set down for hearing in July. Do you know why I am telling you this? No. Because you are in it. Damaris did not move. You are named in it, said Lady Honoria. Not by name. You are described. There is a paragraph which sets out that, in the 3 months since a certain inquest, the Marquess of Elincourt has conducted a weekly private correspondence with a young unmarried woman of no family, resident on his own land, who was herself the subject of an unanswered question at that inquest, touching a strong-box belonging to the estate. It observes that the correspondence is common talk in 2 parishes. It invites the court to consider whether a household so conducted is a fit household for a girl of 9. The fire made a small noise. Nobody else made any. My lady, said Damaris, there was never anything in those papers that could not be read aloud in a church. I am perfectly aware of that. Lady Honoria's voice did not change. It is entirely beside the point, and you are clever enough to know it is beside the point. There is nothing in it. There does not need to be anything in it. It needs only to be sayable, and it is sayable, and in July, a man in a wig will hear it said. You had that paragraph written. I instructed it. I read it in draft. I altered 1 word of it to make it worse. The old woman looked at the fire. I have not slept particularly well since. I mention that not to be forgiven. I mention it so that you understand. You are not being handled by somebody who does not know what she is doing. Which word? I beg your pardon. Which word did you alter? Lady Honoria did not answer at once, and when she did, she answered looking at the fire and not at the woman she was speaking to. It said a young woman of no family. I struck out young. She turned her gloves over on her knee. A young woman is a folly. A woman is a household. I have been 40 years in rooms where cases are decided, and I know precisely which of those 2 words does the work. And I sat at a table in Marbury, with a pen in my hand, and I chose the one that would cost him his daughter. You may take that away with you, and think what you like of me. I have thought it already. Damaris found that she had sat down on the stool at the lace frame without meaning to. Now, said Lady Honoria, the rest. You have lost the use of 2 fingers of your right hand, the 4th and the 5th. You lost them on a coach door on the night you brought my son-in-law off that moor. Marchbank of Thirsk returned your last order in April and has taken nothing from you since. You have no trade, no rent that you can meet past Martinmas, and a grandmother who cannot be moved. You had all of this before I came up your path, and none of it is my doing, and I want it said out loud in this room because I do not think anybody else has said it to you. No, said Damaris. Nobody has. He does not know about the hand. No. Why? Because he would pay for it. Lady Honoria was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He would. Within the hour. She took a folded paper out of her glove and held it out. I have brought 2 things, and this is the first. It is an undertaking. It says that you will not receive or answer any communication from the Marquess of Elincourt before the action is disposed of. It is not for the court, it is for me. The second thing is a sum, which is on the other side of that sheet, and which I will not insult you by describing as anything other than what it is. It would keep you and your grandmother for 9 years, and it would buy you a house in Thirsk that you do not have to work to hold. Damaris looked at the paper. She did not take it. No, she said, you have not read it. I do not need to read it. My lady, I have refused money in this room before, and I have thought a great deal since about why, and I can tell you now in 1 sentence. My mother spent 11 years being grateful to a decent man, and it killed her by inches. I will not sign a paper that puts me in anybody's debt, and I will not be told by anybody living what I may read and what I may not. And if you had come here and asked me instead of buying me, you might have got what you came for." Lady Honoria put the paper back into her glove. "That," she said, "is very nearly the most stupid thing I have ever heard a sensible woman say. I dare say. He will lose her." The voice went, for the first time, very slightly out of true. "Do you understand that?" "Not certainly." "Probably. And she has already lost a mother and a father, and you are going to hand her a third loss out of pride, and call it dignity, and go on living in a house you cannot pay for." Damaris looked up. "My lady, may I ask you one thing?" "You may not." "What do you want her for?" The room went completely still. "I beg your pardon." "You come to Ellencourt 4 times a year. Clemence told me." 4. "She told me you correct her hands at table, and that she is not permitted to run in the long gallery when you are in the house. And she told me both of those things in a corridor while she was waiting to be told how a man died, because nobody had told her, and she came to a stranger for it." Damaris did not raise her voice at all. "I have watched a child be handled as an obligation. I sat in a house where I was one. You are not fighting for that girl, my lady. You are fighting because she is the last piece of your daughter that is still walking about, and you cannot bear that it lives in another man's house. That is not the same thing, and a man in a wig may not be able to tell the difference, but you can." Honoria Vashi did not answer. She sat in a blind woman's chair in a kitchen on the low road, with her gloves on her knee, and she did not answer, and her hand closed once on the arm of the chair and opened again. Then she stood up. "You will regret this conversation," she said. "Very likely. Good day, Miss Lark." "Good day, my lady. I am sorry about your daughter. Nobody has said that to you today, either." Lady Honoria stopped in the doorway with her back to the room, and stood there a moment and went down the path. The carriage turned in the lane with some difficulty and went away, and Damaris stood in the door until the sound of it was gone off the hill. Then she came inside and sat down at the frame with the bobbins hanging still in front of her, and after a while her grandmother came out of the scullery and stopped in the middle of the floor and said, "Well." "She was right about all of it," said Damaris. "She was. Every fact. Facts is what her sort has instead of sense." Aveline found the arm of her chair and lowered herself into it. "What will you do?" Damaris did not answer for a long time. Then she got up and took the pen and the ink out of the press and set them on the table, and sat down in front of a clean sheet of paper. She did not write the paper Lady Honoria wanted. She wrote her own. "My lord, I am asking you to send no more questions. Not until the July business is finished, and not after it either, unless you have thought about it a long time and still want to. You told me in your own house that you would stop the day I said so, and that nothing would happen to me for it. And I believed you then, and I believe you now, which is why I am able to write this at all. Do not come. I am not angry, and there is nothing wrong here. This is the only side of it I can find that does not cost a child anything. D. Lark." She gave it to the carrier on the Monday. The following Tuesday, nothing came, and she had expected it, and it was still the longest day she could remember. She began to count. She had counted her steps on that road since she was a girl, and 60 on a dead man's neck, and 1,200 with a marquess on her arm, and she found now that she could not stop herself doing it with days. 9. The lease notice came from Martinmas, and she put it behind the clock. 17. Marchbank sent a boy for the 2 pillow lengths she had left, and paid under, and she took it. 23. A woman in Harnby who had not spoken since March asked after her grandmother, which meant the talk had stopped. 31. She took the lace frame down. She unpinned the piece she had been 9 weeks failing to finish, folded it into the press with the September one, took the frame apart at the joints, and stood the pieces of it behind the door. Her grandmother came in an hour later and stopped just inside the room. "Where is it?" "Behind the door." "You put your mother's frame behind a door." "I cannot work it. I have not been able to since January, and the pretending is over. Now you know, and there is nobody left to tell. Damaris, do not." The old woman came across the room without hesitating once, because she had never in 9 years hesitated in that room, and found her granddaughter by the shoulder, and stood behind her, with both hands on her, and said nothing. And Damaris put her face down on the empty table where the frame had been, and cried for the first time since the gate. 57. On the 58th day she walked up to the gate. The road was hard and pale, and there was dust on the walls. The beck was down to a thread. Where the snow had been there was ling and flower, and a lark going up out of sight. And the 2 posts stood in all that heat, like something left behind, by people who had gone. She sat down on the fallen lintel. She had done the right thing. She had done it for a child she met once in a corridor, and would do it again in the morning. She sat there until the light changed, and could not tell in all that time whether the right thing and the true thing were the same, and thought that if she lived as long as her grandmother, she might not find out. He was in the lane below the cottage. She came down off the moor with the sun behind her, and there was a horse standing at the wall with its head down in the grass, and a man sitting on the wall beside it in his shirt sleeves, with his coat over his arm. And he stood up when he saw her, and did not come any nearer. "Damaris stopped in the road. You said you would not come. You said, do not come. I have not come. I have been sitting on this wall since 2 o'clock, and I have not gone up to the house, and I do not intend to. And if you tell me to get on that horse, I shall get on it." He stayed exactly where he was. "It is the 15th of July. It was decided on Tuesday. I have waited 3 days to be certain I was not coming here for my own sake." She could not make her voice work at once. "And she is mine. It is finished. There is no appeal, and there will not be one." Damaris put her hand out and found the wall. "How?" "That," he said, "is the part I have come 8 miles to tell you, and I would ask you to sit down for it." He waited until she had. They examined Clemence, privately, in chambers, without either party present, which is the practice. I was not told what she said, and I am not entitled to know. But the commissioner said a thing in open court on Tuesday afternoon, which he did not have to say, and I have had it written out, and I have it here, and I am going to read you 1 line of it, because you are the only person alive who will understand what it means. He said, "This court has been invited to find that the child has been exposed to an unsuitable connection. The court has instead heard from the child that the only occasion in 2 years on which anybody gave her a true account of a death in her own household was given to her on a bench in a passage by the woman complained of." The lark had come down. It was very quiet in the lane. "She told them about Isham," said Damaris. "She told them about you. She told them what you said, and the order you said it in. All 3 things. And she has never once repeated any of it to me. And when I asked her on Tuesday night why she had never told me, she said she thought it would make me sad." He looked away down the lane. "I have had that girl 4 years, and I did not know she was carrying that about for me. She is 9. She is 9. He was quiet a moment. "There is one thing more, and I would rather you heard it from me. Her grandmother was in court on Tuesday. She heard that line read out with the rest of it, and when the commissioner had done, She got up and went out before the room was cleared, which is not a thing she has ever done in her life, and her carriage was gone off the square inside 10 minutes. She has not written to me. I do not expect she will. She came to me in May. I know. I found out on Friday, and not from her. His jaw moved. I have spent since Friday deciding what I am entitled to say to her about it, and I have arrived at nothing, because every road I go down ends in the same place, which is that she wasn't wrong about a single fact, and I would have had to answer her with feelings, and she does not take payment in that coin. No, said Damaris, she does not. He put his coat on the wall. Miss Lark, I am not here to ask you anything. I want that said before anything else is said, because you have had one person come up this lane in May to arrange your life for you, and I will not be the second. I gave you my word in February that I would not make you an offer, and you gave me an instruction in May, and I hold both. I have come to tell you that the thing is over, and that the child is safe, and that it was your doing, and to say thank you, and then I am going to get on that horse. He stopped. That is not true. I have been practicing it since Bishopdale, and it is not true, and I will not stand in a road and lie to you. I have come because I have not had a Tuesday in 8 weeks, and I didn't know what a Tuesday was for until I stopped having them. I have written 8 of them, and not sent one. They are in a drawer. I wrote them on the day, and folded them on the day, and I could not put them in a bag. And every Tuesday I have known exactly what I wanted to ask you, and had nowhere on this earth to put it. Damaris looked at the road between her boots. What was the last one? I shall not tell you that. Why not? Because you have not taken the instruction back, he said, and until you do, that question is mine, and not yours, and I have kept better hold of harder things than that in the last 8 weeks. Damaris sat down on the wall. May I say something? She said. You may say anything. I have been counting the days, since the Monday I sent the carrier. She was looking at the road, not at him. It is 58. I know it is 58 the way I know how many steps it is to the milestone, which is a thing I cannot help and never could. And on about the 9th of them, I understood something, and I have been carrying it about since, and I have had nobody to give it to. In February, I told you I refused you in September because I would not spend my life being grateful. That was true. I have thought about it every day since, and it is still true, and it is not the whole of it, and I want to say the whole of it now, because I don't know when I shall get another chance. My mother was not destroyed by being given things. She was destroyed by never once being asked. 11 years in that man's house, and he was kind to her every single day, and he never asked her one question. Not what she thought, not what she wanted, not whether she was happy. Not on the last morning. Kindness came at her like weather. She had no way to answer it, and no way to refuse it, and no way to be anything in the middle of it, except grateful. You sent me 14 questions. I have them in a caddy with no tea in it. Not one of them was a gift, and not one of them wanted anything, and every one of them supposed that I would have an answer, and that the answer would be worth the paper. I thought when I refused you in September that I was refusing to be owned. I was refusing to be unasked. Those are not the same thing, and it has taken me 10 months, and a dead man and a blind woman, and a girl of 9 to tell them apart. He had not moved at all. So, she said, that is the whole of it, and it is no use to either of us, because you have given me your word, and I have given you an instruction, and between the two of us, we have built a wall that nobody can get over from either side, and I do not know what to do about it. You could take the instruction back. I take the instruction back. That is one of the two. Damaris looked up at him. Then ask me, she said. He crossed the lane, and he stopped a good pace short of her, and he did not touch her. Damaris Lark, he said, will you marry me? Not because you saved my life, and not because you saved my child, and I will not pretend that either of those is nothing, but neither of them is the reason, and I will not have them stand as the reason. I am asking because I have 14 of your answers in a drawer, every one of them copied out again in my own hand, and because I would like to spend what is left asking you things across a table instead of across a county, and because in 8 weeks of not writing to you, I have found out precisely what I am, when there is nobody to send a question to on a Tuesday, and I did not care for him. Yes, she said. He shut his eyes for a moment. Then he reached out, slowly, and took her right hand, which she had been holding closed in her lap since she sat down, and she let him take it, because she was too tired to be quick, and he turned it over in the light. He was a long time looking at it. How long? He said. Since the latch. How much? The 4th and the 5th. There is nothing there. It came on before I had you as far as the beck, and I knew what it was, and I kept hold of you with it anyway, because it was the hand on your side. You have not worked since April. I took the frame down a month ago. He did not say any of the things she had spent 5 months being certain he would say. He did not name a sum, and he did not offer a surgeon in York, and he did not tell her it could be put right. He stood in a lane in July holding a lacemaker's ruined hand, and he put his own hand over the 2 dead fingers, and closed it, and held it there, and shut his eyes again. Thank you, he said, for not telling me. I know why. I want you to know I know why, and I want you to know that from this day you may tell me everything, and it will not cost you a farthing of anything. And that was all he did. He walked her up the lane with the horse coming behind them on a loose rein, and neither of them said one word the whole way, and Damaris found that she was not counting. They were married in September at Harnby, in the church where she had been christened, a year and 4 days after a lawyer had read her price out loud in her grandmother's kitchen. Aveline Lark stood for the whole of the service, which she had not done for 8 years, and would not be persuaded to sit down. Clemence carried the ring on a piece of lace that Damaris had made left-handed in June, badly, with 2 dropped picots in it, and which she had chosen on purpose over the good pieces in the press. Lady Honoria came. She sat at the back on the left, and she wore gray, and she spoke to nobody before the service and to nobody during it. Afterward, in the churchyard, she came across the grass to the bride and stood in front of her with her gloves in her hand. I have not withdrawn anything I said in your grandmother's kitchen, she said. I did not expect you to. There is one thing. The old woman looked at a point somewhere past Damaris's shoulder. I told you that you had no trade. It was true when I said it, and it is true now. And I knew when I said it, that it was the thing that would go deepest, and I chose it for that reason. I have said a great many cruel things in my life, and most of them I have forgotten. I have not forgotten that one. That is all. I am not asking to be answered. She put her gloves on and went to find her carriage. She did not soften after that, and never became warm, and went on correcting Clemence's hands at table until the girl was 17. But in the November of that first year, at a dinner in York, a man at the far end of the table observed to the company that the new Marchioness had come to the family by way of an inquest and an unaccounted strong-box, and said it in the way such things are said, as a joke that is not one. Lady Honoria set down her glass. She informed the table, in a voice that reached the servants at the door, that the question about the strong-box had been put by counsel acting on her instructions, that she had instructed it herself, that it had been a disgraceful question, and known by her to be disgraceful when she gave it, and that any person repeating it in her hearing was repeating the worst act of her life back to her at her own dinner, and might consider whether they wished to. Nobody ever said it again in Yorkshire. It was the following March, in Thirsk, that she found out the rest. She had an hour before the carriage, and spent it walking, and came along the low end of Kirkgate, and stopped outside a warehouse. Marchbank got as far as your ladyship, gave it up, and shook her hand instead. And she was going, when he said, "It has sat badly with me, this." "What has?" "Sending the work back to you and then buying it after." She stood quite still in the doorway. "Say that again." The old man looked at her, and his face changed. "You do not know." "Say it again slowly." He took her into the back and sat her down and told her. In April, within a fortnight of his returning the 3 lengths, a man had come to him. An agent, well-spoken, with a written authority. He would not leave. Marchbank was to take every piece of lace Damaris Lark offered him, at the full rate and never less, and send it to an address in Leeds. He was on no condition to tell her, and if she asked directly, he was to say nothing rather than lie. "I said no," said Marchbank. 40 years in this trade, and I have never been asked to deceive a woman about her own work. And he said, and I remember it, because it was a strange thing for an agent to say. He said, "She is going to stop. She is going to look at a bad piece one morning and stop, and if she stops now, she will never take it up again." And I thought about your mother, who I bought from 30 year. And I said, "Aye. How many pieces?" 19. Then they stopped, and Leeds wrote that the arrangement was at an end. The old man rubbed his mouth. "I never knew who it was. I have my notion. But I never knew. They went to Leeds, and I never sold one." She said nothing in the carriage, or that night, or for 3 weeks. She said it on a wet evening in April, in the small room with the books, with the rain going across the window in handfuls. "There is a drawer in this house," she said, "with 19 pieces of bad lace in it." Her husband did not look up from his book. "There is." "Where?" "Bottom left of the bureau in my dressing room. It has never been locked." He turned a page. "You have had the run of this house 7 months. Ansel. I bought lace. A man may buy lace. You bought 19 pieces of ruined work at full rate, through an agent, so that a woman who did not know your name was on the paper would go on putting her hands to a pillow every morning. Do not tell me you bought lace." He put the book down and looked at her, and his face had the same weight it had had on her kitchen floor when he asked how long he had been there. "You had lost 2 fingers on my behalf," he said, "and had not told me, and I worked it out in March from watching you hold a teacup, and there was not one thing on this earth I was permitted to do about it. I could not pay you. I could not offer you a surgeon, because you would have known I knew. I could not write and ask, because I had made the question small on purpose, and that was not a small question." He spread his hands once and let them fall. "There was one thing left you would not be able to refuse, which was to be paid the proper price for work you thought worthless by a man you had dealt with for years. So I did that. And when you took the frame down in June, I stopped, because it would have been a lie by then, and because you had a right to put a frame behind a door if you wanted to. They are bad," she said. "The ground is uneven. There are picots dropped in every one. I know. I have looked at all 19. He picked the book up again. "I did not buy them because they were good." She went up and opened the drawer and knelt in front of it, and they were all there, folded flat, in order, with a strip of paper on each in his own hand, giving the month. She stayed up there a long while. Clements never called her anything but Damaris, and Damaris never suggested otherwise, and it happened in its own time. It was the summer the girl turned 11. A woman had come from York with a daughter of the same age, and the two had got on to whether a person could be taught lace or had to be born to it. And the York girl said something about people who work with their hands in the way children repeat what they hear at home. And Clemence Ellencourt said, "My mother has 1.5 hands and can do it better than anybody in the county, so I should not go on with that if I were you." Then she went out to the ponies. Damaris was at the other end of the terrace with a jug in her hand, and she stood holding it, and did not go after her, and did not say a word about it that day or ever. The girl went on saying it the rest of her life without appearing to notice she had begun. She walked the moor road twice a year afterward, going to sit an afternoon with her grandmother, who lived to be 81 and died in her own chair in her own house, with no rent ever asked of her again, because the lease had quietly ceased to exist, and nobody had mentioned it, and Damaris had let that go. She stopped at the gate every time, 2 posts and a fallen lintel and a name that outlived the thing, and no mark on the ground to say anything was decided there. She was past 50 when she noticed. She had come over the top on a bright September afternoon with a basket on her arm, and gone past the milestone and the beck and up to the posts, and put her hand on the stone as she always did. And she understood that she had walked the whole 8 miles without counting one step of it. She thought about the girl who had counted, because counting was what she had instead of anybody. 60 on a dead man's neck. 1,200 with a stranger's weight on her arm. 58 days at a window. Then she went down the hill toward the smoke at the end of the drive, and a man came out of the door before she was halfway, because he had been watching the road about an hour, and would have said so if she had asked him.